Maybe you are not the problem, but if you feel like you are, then this episode of Dysfunctional is definitely for you. Today, I interview Helen, who is a intuitive psychology coach, which means that she works with the conscious and subconscious mind using evidence-based framework backed by science and psychology. But to use my own words, what I love most about Helen is that she is passionate about systemic change. She's passionate about understanding that when we look through a systemic lens, we can bring about the true change that's needed. Maybe the wellness and coaching industry is getting it wrong, over individualizing the issue and making every individual believe that if they're not making their life completely successful, defined only in the parameters of what the system tells you to be success, and if you aren't doing that, then the system tells you that you are the problem. I am passionate about this conversation that I had with Helen, and I encourage you, if you've ever at any stage in your life felt like you are the problem and you can't get over yourself in order to make the change and the progress that you need in your life, this will show you a different lens. You are not the whole problem. Of course, there are bits of work we can all do, but this episode, I believe, will open up your eyes. Sit tight and listen to this because it is phenomenal. Dysfunction is everywhere, in our families, in our cultures, and in our systems. And this is Dysfunctional, the podcast that helps you name the things that most people can or won't see. Let's call it out, break it down, and maybe even start a bloody revolution. Okay, Helen, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, I am super excited about this conversation. And for people listening, we were just talking just before I hit record there, and we are going in pretty blind here, right? Which I really, really like. But I'm really, really intrigued by the work that you do, particularly around the way that you're looking at it. So why don't we just start by you telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world today?
Yeah. So I'm Helen. I am a master intuitive psychology coach, which means that I use an evidence-based, all backed by science and psychology approach to coaching that helps people actively work with their intuition. So we do that with the conscious mind and also at the subconscious level. But my passion is social change, right? So I've worked in social change for over 20 years. And so I always say that my work is where coaching meets systems change. So I work with predominantly women, female leaders, to help them to lead by being unapologetically themselves. So not by what the patriarchy's told us that we should lead by, not where we've absorbed this traditional leadership norms, but by leading, because the representation in my mind isn't enough. It's not enough to have female leaders in organizations. There needs to be safety, and women need to feel safe to lead by themselves, by being themselves. So that's part of my work. And then the other part of my work is I work with organizations who want to embed genuine social responsibility into their organization. So not a tick box exercise of like, oh, we've given this charity 100 quid, happy days. Like, who genuinely want to embed social responsibility at the core of their organization. And I do that by working with their leaders and teams to develop human-centered leaders who understand themselves so that they can understand others and genuinely create inclusive spaces, a sense of belonging in their organization. But it's not enough to do that on its own. We need to translate that into how our organizations function at the core of our organization, in our values, in our policies, in our working practices. And so then I do consultancy to say, okay, so how are we going to translate this? How are you going to look after your people and embed social responsibility internally in terms of prioritizing staff well-being, inclusivity, how you work? But if you want to do that meaningfully in communities, let's look at how you can adopt that meaningfully in the wider community and contribute positively to social change, essentially. So I'm working with an organisation at the moment, for example, who adapted their apprenticeship scheme. So they run apprenticeships for people leaving prison, and they wouldn't have done that before. They literally gave 100 quid to a charity. So it's like adopting that much more genuine kind of social approach.
Wow. you stumped me a little bit with the bit at the end about like actually getting an organization to be willing to employ apprentices that are coming out of prison.
Yeah. And that the thing, right? So I've worked in social change for 20 years, right? And one of the reasons I set up my business is because I get frustrated by the fact that we social problems can't be solved in isolation. Like it's not just the responsibility of the charity or public sector to address social issues, because the issues are too complex. Services are stretched. We all live as part of society. It's all our responsibility. So the way that we create social change, to my mind, is by working in partnership and genuinely creating cross-sector partnership between business and between charities and organizations who we can work together to affect social change. So, and I think that starts with genuinely having leaders and cultures in organizations who understand themselves, so they're not leading from a place of bias, and they dare take risks. Like partly the issue with taking on an apprentice who's left prison is because of your own bias towards what you think that person's going to be like, and the risk, like I'm too scared, what happens here if this doesn't work out. But when you have leaders who genuinely understand themselves on that deeper level, create this sense of safety, they can take risks because they trust themselves to do so. And it's like shifting that paradigm of leadership from that command and control to being genuinely human and seeing everyone as humans. And that just starts with us understanding ourselves. And when we do that, we can do things differently. Like we don't have to absorb the same ways of doing things that we've always done.
Wait, I love this. Why do you think then that so many leaders, because I totally agree with you, but why? Because when I look at myself and when I look at my own journey, the more and more that I've understood myself, the more and more that I've been confident to stand up for the things that I believe in, right? So when my journey of what I would call healing started off like actively 12, 13 years ago, I would not have been able to say some of the things that I'm saying today, right? And a lot of that is because I feel like I know myself now. Like I know myself well enough to know that if somebody stands up to me, I will challenge myself. I might quit back originally, but then I'll come back to challenging myself and thinking, okay, well, am I right? Am I wrong? How do I grow as a result of this? The question I'm getting to is, why do you think so many leaders, and if you want to talk specifically or particularly about women, if that is slightly different, I would guess that it probably is. Why do you think we reach a stage in our lives where we don't understand ourselves?
Oh, right. It's my favorite topic of conversation, right? So basically, so I think we all are born, right, with this intuitive nature. We all understand our worth, right? Babies and kids are the champions at getting their needs met because they know, they don't think, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. They feel that sense of worth. They connected to who they are, and they will scream until they get their needs met or not, but that's what will happen. And over time we adapt, right? We're hardwired for survival, so we adapt to we go because we need to attach. So we need to attach to our caregivers. So we adapt to become who our caregivers need us to be. And that's one element. But I think the element that we often miss out is that there's also the societal element, and we adapt to become who society wants us to be, and those systems. So we live in a capitalist society, a patriarchal society. Those systems tell us, we absorb these beliefs into our subconscious. They tell us that our worth is determined by our productivity. Capitalism, that's the essence of capitalism, right? Patriarchy tells women that their value is based on what they look like, or that women are the caregivers, men go to work. We absorb these things all the time into our subconscious, and it disconnects us from who we really are. So we don't trust ourselves, so we outsource our sense of worth and our knowledge to other people. I think that's why there's a rise of like gurus and all that kind of thing, because we're so disconnected because of our societal systems from who we are. And in the more cynical among us, me, would say that it actually serves those systems to keep us, that we'd say we don't trust ourselves. Because imagine how many, if women, for example, woke up tomorrow and believed and felt that innate sense of intuitive worth, how many industries would collapse. Like how many, it would transform the way that we operate and function as a society. And I think we get to that stage where we become so disconnected from who we are because of our childhood experiences and because of the systems that we navigate every single day in society, that we don't trust ourselves anymore, because we don't really know who we are, because we've absorbed all these messages about who we need to be. And the reality is that those, even if consciously we're questioning those values, right, and as we get older and think, well, what are my values on a conscious level? We operate from our subconscious mind 95% of the time. That is literally how our brains work. And so those values that we've absorbed from society are dictating our behaviors without us even necessarily realizing it, because these beliefs live in our subconscious. And until we unearth some of those, we will prop up and we will uphold those systems, because that's what we believe that we need to do on a subconscious level.
Honestly, I was sort of struggling a little bit to sit still then and let you finish when you were talking, because again, and like try and relate to like my own journey to help people that are listening to this understand exactly what you're saying. Because on my journey, I did the work around my family, right? Like I grew up in a bit of a dysfunctional family, particularly in my initial years, right? Did loads of work around that. And then I kind of realized, hang on a minute, like the society and the structures and the system that we live in is way more dysfunctional. and the system and the society that we live in is asking me to be different way more than the environment that I lived in when I was younger, within the family environment. Now, I'm like you. Call us cynical, call us whatever you want. I believe that the system is like that by design, because you don't want a bunch of empowered people who are truly in themselves, truly in that kind of intuition of knowing who the fuck they are,
exactly,
and what they can do in the world. Like then you realize that the system in itself is abusive, right? Because would you agree? Do you think the system that we exist in is abusive? Would you call it that?
I'd say it's oppressive. I'd say it's dysfunctional. And right, so I've worked in systems change focused roles in my career, and the system always serves somebody, right? The system, it didn't just exist out of nowhere. It's serving a purpose, but the fallout of that system is it's serving a certain fraction of society. The rest of us, it's not serving. It's oppressive. It perpetuates social problems. And the other thing that I find really interesting is that we talk about the system like it's this big monster outside of us, but like, what is the system? We are the system, right? That we are we absorb, like I was saying before, we absorb those beliefs as a society, and then we create policies, institutions, ways of working based on those beliefs. So ultimately, we are propping up the system because we create the system. And some people might say, oh, that's pessimistic, but it's not, because I was like, when you realize that, you have so much agency to be able to change those dysfunctional systems. You don't have to just accept them. You don't have to run on autopilot anymore. You get to say, actually, no, if you, instead of ignoring the system, like, this is so, like you were saying, this is so dysfunctional. This can't be all right. Let me navigate this differently. Let me challenge it. Let me talk about this. Let me find my allies to change this. Like, this isn't, like, we don't have to just accept it, I suppose. Is my point.
And I think it's a really, really important point, right? Because when I think about my audience, right, particularly across some of my social media channels, I talk about, one of the things that I talk about is abusive parents, right? Mm-hmm. Parents that are abusive. And everybody will agree with me that we need to talk about it. People that have experienced an abusive parent, at least, know that we should talk about it, right? And they would say that it's enablism to pretend that we can't do anything about it. You're complicit if you're just silent and you let it happen, right? But then when you broaden that and you go, okay, well, the same abusive structure exists within society, people go, yeah, but you won't change it. And I'm like, but that's part of the system, the way that it works, right? The system wants you to believe that you can't and you won't change it. And that's simply not true. Because, as you said, we are the system,
Yeah.
right? I want to rewind a little bit because I recognize I'm getting carried away with knowing that you're speaking exactly my language. I want to bring it back. I do want to talk particularly about girls and women. I'm a father of 4 girls, right? So I'm quite passionate about it, particularly when I look at my 2 youngest girls, who are like 9 and 7. I've been much more conscious now throughout their sort of younger years, right? And I always use them as an example where the elder one of them two, my 9-year-old daughter, is really sporty, only wants to wear football kits, is only interested in that, right? My other daughter, the younger one of the two, is cheerleading, pink dresses and all of that stuff, right? I have really seen the struggles between those two when we're out in public, right? And how the struggle my eldest daughter's had to go through to be herself because adults will compliment her sister and not her regularly when her sister's in a dress and she's not, right? So I see like that's a very simple example. I think some people close down a little bit when we talk about patriarchy and stuff like, particularly like men can sometimes close down, right? Because they think some men find it as to be an attack on them. Can you speak to that a little bit and what you mean when you say it's patriarchal, the system, when you talk about women and stuff like that? Have I shaped enough of a
I think so.
you?
So I empathize because I have 2 girls as well, a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and my 7-year-old is just doesn't conform to any social norms that and you do, and you can see people's reactions to that and the way that they're treated, because when we talk about right, we all live in society, in a society, and a part of our society we have social norms that are acceptable, social values that live in our society. So when we talk about patriarchy, that's essentially what we're saying, that the predominant norms in society are those defined ways of talking about gender, our expectations of gender. And I think I like to talk to what you were saying about men. Like, it's not necessarily an individual attack on men as individuals. We're talking about this collective sense of what we value, what we believe is socially acceptable. It's again, it's bigger than, it's not attacking the individual. It's speaking to that collective norms that we've created, but we've become part of. And I think that the solution isn't to attack individuals, it's to recognize that actually these are the norms that are kind of governing our behaviors, they're governing, and say actually collectively, like, this doesn't work anymore, like we want to do things differently. It's not about like attacking an individual, it's about coming together and saying it's not serve I don't think that patriarchy serves a set of people, of course, but generally it doesn't serve anyone. I think, men who want to do things differently and women who don't want to live in under these values anymore. So the power is in that collective agency to do something, not like attacking people from an individual perspective.
Yeah, and I see that with my, like when I look at my daughter, so she's a massive football fan, right? And I never understood the need for representation. I knew about representation, right? I heard people talk about it and I would, believe in it and stuff, but I never understood the need of it until my daughter started playing football and the way she changed when I got out and I started taking her to ladies' football games. We took her to England and I had a really emotional moment at an England game when Mary Earps came out. She's like the famous goalkeeper. And I just heard in Wembley just this eruption of screams from young girls because there's this woman here who looks like them and is dressing like them and is in football kits, right? And so when we talk about the way that it serves, and like when I think about patriarchy and what you've just described there, that translates to like men get upset when they see a woman commentator on football, right? And look, I'll be completely candid with you. Back in the day, I might have been a bit like, oh, you can have the women's game. I might have been a bit like that because I didn't understand the difference it makes when my 9-year-old daughter is sat next to me and there's someone like her on the telly talking about football in the way she talks about it with me.
Yeah.
Because I watched her, stop wearing, want to stop forcing herself to
Mm.
fit into girls' clothes
Yeah.
because she couldn't go out in a football kit,
Yeah.
you know. And I think that we've lived in a society for so long when because we forced them to do that. We forced girls into those societal norms,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. So one of our fundamental needs as a human is a sense of belonging. And when you see other people who are like you, it forges that feeling and sense of belonging. So, like, my eldest daughter absolutely loves football. Like, she's a big Liverpool. We take her to see Liverpool women all the time, and you can see her, and she wants to be a footballer. But I think a while ago she wouldn't have even been in her psyche to think that, because she sees women, and it makes and I think if you drop below, like, what does that actually mean? It means that there's a sense of belonging, and it's meeting that need of belonging. So representation for me goes way beyond just, oh, look, they're like me. It's what it evokes in us, and in terms of possibility and that sense of worth and belonging.
Yeah, yeah, and because then it gives you that opportunity to come back to some of the things that you started off talking about, which is to be able to stay in yourself, stay close to your intuition,
Yeah.
and have that sense of belonging,
Yeah.
right? Because we've created a system and a society that says if you want the sense of belonging, then you must conform
Yeah.
and fit into that. So unless you fit into that, and some people do,
Mm.
right? Some people are comfortable being highly productive, highly part of the capitalist society, and it's not that they're wrong. It's just that the system's only for them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And unless you fit that, you have to abandon yourself, right? And then to fit into the system.
Yeah.
So you either get belonging or you get to be yourself. You don't get both.
Yeah.
And I feel like that, that's what happens in a lot of systems. Do you see it within like organizations that you work with when you go in originally? Do you see organizations that are set up with this like imbalance of power and the power dynamics going on? Because I think it happens accidentally
Yeah.
sometimes, right? To good people, yeah. Do you see that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think, and I agree that I think it does happen accidentally. I think because we kind of, as a society, almost operating on autopilot. Like,
Mm,
so if we think about like how we've absorbed the societal norms into our subconscious, they don't go away when you enter the workplace. They become the way they drive our behavior. So the way that we set up our workplaces, the policies that we create, the ways of working, the culture that we create, they are a result of our beliefs and our behaviors and our values, and so they trickle through organizations, often without, it's not necessarily that it was intended to be set up that way, but that because we're operating basically on autopilot without doing that deeper work to understand where these things are coming from, that they pervade, they become embedded into our organizations. And that's why when I work with organizations, the first thing is like, it starts with aligning the leadership, and like getting leaders who are brave enough to do that inner work, to understand themselves. What's their purpose of their leadership? How am I leading? How am I showing up? And what's really going on here? And because when we unearth some of those patterns and our identities, a lot of some of them, they're quite shocked. They're like, I just didn't realize that was what was going on. And because we can do that by working, like I work with intuition, like you can unearth those quite quickly and feel quite safe to do so. And then once they've had that light bulb moment of like, I didn't realize that identity or that belief was driving my behavior, then you can make a different choice. You can do things differently. You can show up differently for your team. You can adapt your flexible working policy or whatever it might be, because you're no longer running on this kind of autopilot of these inherited social norms and values that we then perpetuate without doing that really deeper. And it's beyond mindset work, right? Because when you just work with the conscious mind, you're just rearranging what you already know. But because what I was saying before is like we operate from our subconscious mind 95% of the time, we have to go a bit deeper. And I think that there's a real challenge, I think, in leadership where it's almost accepted that you do a leadership program where it's very, I don't know, vanilla and you work with the conscious mind, and you might set a few goals, and that feel relatively comfortable. But what my work is saying, you're gonna have to feel a bit uncomfortable and do that deeper level of work, because that's how we create real change.
You have to really challenge yourself,
Yeah.
like initially when you get in, because I think this, when you get into any leadership role, and when I look at like the platform that I've built, and I've talked as openly as I can about this in the past, right? But they become, you get a certain sense of power,
Yeah.
right? With what I do, there's power, right? I've got a big following online. I've got people that trust in me and believe in what I say, right? And that's very alluring,
Oh,
right? It's very alluring to like start hanging on that and not to run away with the power, right? And I have to work regularly to come back to myself to make sure that I'm not like getting a guru complex
yeah.
or running away with the power that can come with that. And the reason I'm saying that is because I can see how I consider myself a good person, right? But I can see how when you're given that power, how almost like not almost how addictive
Yeah.
that can become, and then how you can run away with that imbalance of power
Yeah.
then, right? And then all of a sudden, if I'm not careful in my quest to go against patriarchy and against the systems, I actually just start to create a system that's exactly the same, where there's an imbalance of power, and I'm not working on myself and constantly challenging myself to come back to who I
Yeah.
am and to what I believe in,
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I see that missing in the corporate space, and I see that missing in the working environment. So I think it's amazing that you're being able to. That's why I was almost like aghast when you said that you were able to get that organization to bring people
Mm.
in from. But you can't avoid it, right? When you bring people home to themselves, you can't chase that power and stuff, because you won't be able to sit with
Yeah.
yourself when you're in that intuition, right?
Exactly. Once you, it's like, I was thinking, it's like one of the, it's when we talk about system, like in my old role when we used to work for a charity and we talk about systems, and it was quite a mindset shift. It's like, once you've seen the system, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And I think that's the
Mm,
same thing as like, once you've sat with that, you can't unsee it. Then it becomes uncomfortable, and so I would say like pain is much more of a driving force for change than pleasure, because you can't sit with that discomfort anymore. You can't ignore it anymore. It's not in a box. And I think that's where you have leaders who, when they have that, they're like, actually, I want to do things differently. I want to challenge the way that I do things. And I loved that what you said about that the ego, and almost you could become another system. Like you could
mm.
become like, oh, well, I'm going to challenge social norms. I'm going to challenge patriarchy. I'm going to set, and you almost become so ego driven that you set up another system that's outside of the system. Do you know, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
And part of my frustration of working in the social sector is I think there's a lot of that happens as well. And that was one of the reasons why I changed when I set up my own business, because I felt like I'm working in these organizations where we're becoming the system, like we're becoming part of the problem, because we don't have leaders who are self-aware enough, who create this internal sense of safety, who they become quite eager, because they haven't done that inner work. Right, we set up new systems to challenge the existing systems and just become part of the system and perpetuate the problem. And it just is immensely frustration, which is one of the reasons why I set up my business. I was like, this is not okay.
It's the fundamental reason why I do work. So I originally, years ago, 10 years ago, I thought I would work in the charity sector. I thought that's what I would do and be, right? And I got in it, and I wouldn't have been able to vocalize it in the way that you just have, but I can now,
Yeah.
right? What I saw in a lot of the charity space, and I did a lot in like the addiction
Mm.
space, but I got in there and I was right involved in it, and then I realized this is the same system. It's just like working adjacent to it. And it wasn't that they were all bad people,
No.
but I think lots of them just got lost in it. There was lots of like, and I was one of them, right? Like fixers in there. And then so the system was built around how do we become the people that saves everybody over there? And then even when I was often introduced, I remember feeling uncomfortable when I was introduced as like, oh, we're so lucky to have somebody here who's lived experience. And I was like, because I'm deeply intuitive, right? I would sometimes be in a room and I was like, and I would be thinking, I'm not the only one here with lived. You've all got lived experience,
Yeah.
like you, and you must be running from it, because I can see that you ain't no different to me, but like you're almost separating. So that same system that they were supposedly fighting against was there. And I and that's why I've set up what I do now to, like, I call it like Robin Hood business plan, which is where I work with corporates to have money there so I can go and do the social work in the way, the social activism work in the way that I want to, while also working as hard as I can to make sure that I don't become that system.
Yeah, I had to like sit on my hands then. So I was like, exactly. There's so much you just said then about. I think in that sector you do attract so many people who are there because they want to fix people, probably because they want to fix something in themselves. And I share that sentiment of like rolling out people with lived experience. Like I've worked in organizations where, because someone had lived experience, even though half the people in the room had lived experience, these people who'd been through our services had lived experience, they'd almost roll them out. It's like it almost became like a professional service user. And I was like, this is so wrong on so many levels. And it was almost like, because there was this lack of inner work and self-awareness, that it was kind of almost fulfilling a need within the people that worked there, rather than genuinely challenging the system. And when I worked in like specific systemic change roles, so the whole thing was that we were supposed to be changing from delivering direct services to young people to addressing the systemic factors, addressing the systemic factors within the education system, the health system, like getting to the root of what was causing the disadvantage in the first place. The resistance that we faced, because and I think it's because of this fixer syndrome. Like, well, it's because changing the system, you don't get that direct like hit of like, oh, I've helped that person, and it comes from a good place, but is it misguided? Like if you really want to help people, you need to get to the root of what's going on, not feed your own sense of ego or probably an unmet need through trying to help other people. And I think that's the risk, where we don't do that inner work. Like we just perpetuate the system. So even the institutions that set up, like I'll tell you, the thing that highlighted the systemic issues for me so much is I did my degree in social policy, but I didn't learn really about systems properly until I started work. And my first job after university was working with homeless families who were living in temporary accommodation. And my role was to help them get the benefits, get support while they're in temporary accommodation, then move them on to whatever their more permanent accommodation offer would be. And I was working with this family, this amazing Somali lady with 2 young children. She was given her offer of rehousing in a predominantly overtly racist white area in Manchester. I had to take her to view this property, and while we were there, she was hurled absolute abuse at. I got her in my car. They threw eggs at the car, like was attacked. But because of the system, she had to accept that offer, even though it was unsafe for her and her children to live there, because she would be found to be intentionally homeless unless she accepted the offer of accommodation. And I worked for a local authority at the time, and I technically wasn't even allowed to advocate for her, because you weren't allowed to advocate against the local authority, because I was employed by the local authority. And I was like, that was 20 years ago, but it stayed with me because it just highlights how ineffective like the system can be for the people that you're trying to protect. And until we unravel that, which my mind is, it starts with understanding ourselves. Like, who on earth decided that was the policy? Where's that come from? Like, let's assess that. Let's look at doing things differently. Until we do that, we're going to have these dysfunctional systems that prop up the bigger external systems that we all operate within.
Look, I mean, if we take that like real example that you given, just horrific by the
Yeah.
way, but if we take like I take that and just sort of like take that on a bit, and I can see people now talking, say that lady decided this isn't safe, I'm not taking my kids there, so then she was what was the term
It's
you
called
used? But
intentionally homeless.
intentionally homeless. I can see people talking about X amount of like immigrants that are intentionally homeless,
Yeah.
and like what about those?
Yeah.
Like they're not even we're trying to give them houses and they're not even accepting it,
Yeah.
right? And you can see how that stuff can grow. And like just to bring in another example, when I was doing stuff with NACOA, which is a charity that supports children of alcoholics, who I love, right? They've like, to their own detriment over the years, they've been around for like over 30 years, have never really got proper government funding because they won't like give away some of the things that the government funding makes you do, right? So like an example would be government funding often want you to collect data. But one of the main things that NACOA does is an anonymous helpline where we will not try and collect data no matter what, right? Yeah. And I remember sitting with a bunch of people from other addiction charities, and they were talking about all these different ideas, which were great, right? Which would like work with people where their parents are engaging with services and stuff like that. And I remember sitting in this room and I said, yeah, but most of the kids that we're talking about, their parents are not engaging with services. And we need to make sure that we're helping them. And trust me when I say this, I was in a room of about 10 people and I could feel them, all 10 of them going, why would we bother helping them? Like it's like, we'd never know that we've helped them. So what would be the point? Some of that was being like a slave to the system in terms of like making sure that you get funding and you won't be able to prove that you're helping people. And I just sat there and I thought, and then some of it was, I don't care about helping people that can't tell me that I've helped them.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Because the only reason I'm here is to save people.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in helping and supporting and genuinely creating change. I just want to save people, right? So, and like I see that, and look, I'm not saying that I'm completely excluded from that. I get caught in saving people, and part of the work I've done on myself in the more recent years is like, how do I create spaces where I'm not trying to be a savior, you know? Because I've done that and I've got caught up in that, and I'm just saying that to make sure that I'm not pointing away and going, everybody else is terrible, right? And I'm the perfect example. But that does segue quite nicely, if we can, into a part of a conversation that I wanted to have. Like, in my notes, I wrote the individualistic trap of the coaching and the wellness industry, right? Can we just speak to that and how you, in your work, are able to reframe that through like a systemic lens?
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite topics, and the other reason I set up my coaching business was partly to extend the social responsibility. And so basically, what frustrates me about the coaching and wellness industry is that it's very individualized, right? And and I am not taking away from the fact, right, that our individual experiences shape who we are. Of course they do. Our childhood, our trauma, you know, I've experienced childhood trauma that I've had to heal from, you know, like I'm not saying that that's not important. Of course it is, but it's not the only part of the puzzle. And I think what's damaging is when we only focus on that and then we ignore the fact that we live in a society. We don't exist as in an individual bubble. We live as part of society where we're all interconnected by social values, social norms, the dominant social narratives that we interact with, and then the systems, our education system, our health system that are set up, right? So if we then just ignore that whole part of the puzzle, I think it's damaging for two reasons. I think firstly, systemic issues can become an individual issue. So like I was saying before, I work quite a lot with women, like a lot of like senior leaders. But to be honest, every woman in my life I know, whether it's through work or my own life, has experienced burnout, right? It's because it's not an individual issue. It's a pattern, it's systemic. And if we don't see it as such, you know, because of how women are conditioned to overgive, and then the infrastructure, we're still seen as primary caregivers, carrying the mental load, but then the social infrastructure hasn't developed for the fact that most women work now. So the childcare system doesn't work, the education system doesn't work because it's 9 till 3, and we're expecting, you know, all those systemic factors. When we only work with a woman, if I just worked with a woman on burnout and was like, okay, so you need to regulate your nervous system, you need to change your mindset, she'd be like, well, I've done all this work on myself, why am I still struggling? And I'd be like, you're still struggling because it's a systemic, you're still navigating those dysfunctional systems that caused the problem in the first place. It wasn't just an individual issue. Yes, let's work with you to up your individual resources, but there's a way bigger picture here. And don't let societal issues let you become the problem. Let's see the system for what it is so we can challenge it. And I think that's my second point of why it's damaging. So it doesn't... That then we prop up those systems. So instead of seeing the societal factors, for example, that have contributed to that burnout, we go, okay, so I need to be more productive. I'm going to get up at 5. I'm going to use all these productivity caps. I'm going to time block. I'm going to do all this stuff because I must be the problem. So then I'm going to do all I can to not be the problem. And I'm going to look at this individual view of how I can change myself to then fit into this system that ultimately just doesn't work. And I think that it's so damaging if we ignore that. So then we prop those systems up unknowingly, essentially, like we contribute to the problem, and we're not going to, until we see the system for what it is, we're not going to challenge it. We're always going to prop it up. We can't just take that individual view.
Do you have some examples of like how the system has got like that? Like, let me give you what I think might be an example, and you tell me if it's wrong. Like, I do want you to tell me if it's wrong. So, something I've noticed in my lifetime, at least during my lifetime, like it is now just accepted that both parents within a family. So let's say that in this instance, the parents are male and female, right? It's now accepted. It's just the social norm is that both of you will work full time. But I still feel like, I know that like kids go to childminders or whatever they do, but I still feel like the woman in that relationship still is taking most of the emotional burden of raising the child. So she might be at work during the day now because she has to, because you've got no chance of owning a home if she's not, by the way, in most cases in the average family. But she still has to carry the emotion. So she has to go to work and think about whatever it is that she's doing at work all day, but also that emotional responsibility and weight for the child is there. And then you give her a burnout coach who says the solution is time block. Am I framing that like a real life example correctly?
That is literally 100%. I've probably worked with that that woman. That happens all the time. Like, okay, so let's look at what's your mindset around that. Let's how can we increase your productivity? I'm like, no, it's because so women, like, of course it's now brilliant that women have opportunity to work, but we haven't evolved as a society to support that development. So what happens is women are sold this, oh, you can have it all, but what that actually, because we haven't evolved as a society in terms of our infrastructure and our values and what we believe in, that we just end up doing it all, because the societal infrastructure hasn't increased hasn't evolved to create that. So then you have these like women who are just on their knees, exhausted, and because we don't take the systemic lens all the time, that it's fair. Loads of my friends would be like that they think that they're the problem, and like you are not. Like, you are trying. It's like if you plant a flower, right? If you plant a seed in soil, and then you didn't water it, and you didn't give it any light, and you didn't and it was, the soil was dodgy, and it was, that flower wouldn't grow. And it's the same. I don't know why we expect humans to thrive in dysfunctional systems, because you're not given the conditions to be able to thrive. And if we ignore that and say that it's an individual issue, then it's damaging for the individual, and we prop up, instead of challenging those systems, we prop them up.
Yeah, because we pull that seed out of the ground and then start looking at it to try and identify what's wrong with the seed.
Yeah, exactly. What's wrong with you? Why didn't you grow? And be like, well, you didn't have any light, you didn't have any water. It frustrates me that we just don't take that more holistic view. And I think that's where real social change happens. It's like, when we don't ignore it, that's what I think. And I think we have more agency than we think. But if we ignore it, we don't. But when we don't ignore it, and we bring the wellness and coaching industry together with that kind of systemic and societal, there's real power there, because all these people who are really individually connected to who they really are from an individual perspective, and also can see that there's all these systemic factors going on, like we're onto a winner there in terms of challenging it. But if we don't, we just prop it up.
Yeah, and it shows you, doesn't it, that social change is needed constantly and consistently, right? Because if you look at like that example that we just spoke about, and you think about like women, and like empowering them, like giving them more opportunity to be able to do the career and all of that stuff. And look, I know there's a long way to go in on that front as well, but like we've done that bit, but then the system gobbles that up a little bit. And then just goes, right, well, now that we've got both people working, it's impossible not to have both people working in the family. So we're taking more money out from them. Yeah. And let's just have them, they can now be as productive as the other parent within the family. And then all of a sudden, this empowerment, this great thing that we were doing, gets gobbled up by the system. And then so society and social change must keep up with
Yeah.
that. Okay, so we've got this new thing. How are we going to deal with that? And so what, like, this might be a difficult question or it might be hard to sort of articulate, but how do we join those things? Yeah. How do we do that
So
so that we can do that? Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't think it's that hard because, well, because right. So when I've worked in, there's models and there's tools that you. So in systems change, right, when you're working to change a systemic issue, there are toolkits you can use. There are ways of working that you can look at and to challenge the system. And what I do in my work and when I work with female leaders is like, okay, let's look at the individual view, and then we use some of those tools to look at the systemic factors that are affecting. And then there are tools that you can use, like finding the flex in the system, like finding your allies. Like this happens outside of the wellness industry. It happens in it's not prominent in charities, but it happens that these systems tools are being used outside of the coaching sector. So my mind was like, well, why don't we bring those in? Because there's like a picture that you can use, like it's like the layers of an onion, and I often work through it with my clients where there's an individual stood in the middle, and then that's like your individual experiences, and then you look to the next layer and you're like, okay, so how are your local areas, what are the local policies around you, what are your peers doing, and it might be work. Then the next layer is like, okay, what are the national policies and the national ways of working and the national things that are going on that are impacting you. And then the outer layer of the onion is looking at what are the social norms, what are the values, what are those bigger kind of beliefs that are impacting you. And so you can break it down and go, okay, as an individual, these are the things that are impacting me. What do I have agency over to change, like as a person, like doing the inner work and all that kind of thing. And actually and even if you don't want to then challenge those dysfunctional systems, at least seeing it there in plain sight and saying, it wasn't me. Like, look at all these factors, look at all these things that have been impacting me. I was never the problem. And even just having that insight, I think is the first step. And then if you want to go on and challenge things, then there is tools that you can, and it takes time and it takes effort. And I'm not saying it's down to one person, but it just shows that there is tools that you can use and that you have more agency than you think.
Yeah. Do you know what I think though, as you're speaking as well? Like, I think once you get to once you get back to yourself,
Yeah.
right? When you do enough work on yourself, it just like you said right near the beginning of this conversation, you can't not see it, right? But I do think that it's a stage that the hard bit is getting to people to that stage,
Yeah.
right? Because when I look at my own journey as well, right? And then when I look at the landscape out there, right? When I went from where I was, right, which was in debt, and I did a bit of the kind of hero's journey, right? You get this I never believed that I could do it, and I've done it. And then you think, so can you. So then you ignore all of the systems outside of that, and you go, if I do it, just look, you can do it as well. And then people love that shit,
Yeah,
right? So then they'll celebrate you. And they'll go, no, look, Josh did do it. So, he proves that you can do it. And I won't name names, but there's people out there now that are just going, it's like we sell it as this, amazing, spangly thing to sell, which is you can be anything that you want to be. You've got all the tools at your, disposal. You can have any of it and you can do it. You can really be somebody. And because of the system, everybody will celebrate it, and I look at people that are out there now saying that and being celebrated and lauded as amazing people, and then you take that lady, that case study that you talked about, and you go, well, that ain't true for her.
Yeah.
She couldn't I couldn't share my story with her.
No.
Go, so you can be anything you want to be, and I go, oh my God, he's right,
Yeah.
and then do it. It doesn't work like that. But what fascinates me, and I don't know if you have any input on this or not, if I've just gone off on a bit of a tangent, but what fascinates me is how people can't understand that.
Yeah.
They stay stuck at that. No, you can be You can be anything you want to
Yeah.
be in this country because you've got all the tools at your disposal, and that's it. And if you're not, it's on you.
I've been in a coaching program when I've had loads of coaching myself, and I remember being a really prominent, like, well-known coach. And I said to her, like, she was basically saying, like, you can be anything you want to be, like, you just need to change your story. And I've done it. This person's done it. This person's done it. And I said, I get that. But there's there's a layer of privilege in that? Like, what about like the systemic factors? Like, we're not, in reality, we don't live in a society where we're all born equal, and and she was like, basically, you just need to try harder. And I was like, it's such a dangerous narrative to purvey that. Like, what it just gives me the major ick. I'm like, no. And I think that's it. Like, it starts with that education piece. Like, I get that. I think partly people need that story of like hope and to show that it is possible. And I'm not saying like it's not possible. Of course it is possible. We all know examples of people who've changed their lives and turned things around, but just don't share those stories at the expense of ignoring all the other bit, because it becomes quite elitist and it becomes privilege. Like, even if you didn't come from privilege, there is a layer of privilege that you've been able to access those services. And that the lady who I spoke about wouldn't have that. So I just think we can't. It's about education, and it's not saying dismiss those stories, but just let's be real about it at the
Yeah.
same time. Like, there's nuance. It's not black and white. Like, there's nuance to all conversations. And I think I think especially with social media and whatever, there's kind of that we often lose the nuance. And I think partly in my work, and that's why I'm not a massive fan of social media, is because there's much more nuance to be discussed, and that's where we need to be, not in the black and white.
Yeah, and that nuance, to try and just speak to that nuance a little bit more, when you talk about that coach that was just like saying you just need to try harder, or you just need to do like some of the nuances is like, even when I look at myself and what I've been able to build, right? I'm going to try and say this without sounding arrogant or like full of myself, but I was into drama when I was at school, right? So I've always been quite good at like portraying myself, right? I've been quite good at like saying things and getting people to listen to what I'm saying, right? Not everybody possesses
Yeah.
that. So not everybody could do what I'm doing,
Yeah.
right? In the same way, I could never ever, even if I trained from the day that I was born, run the 100 meters as fast as Usain Bolt ran it, right? I
Yeah.
just couldn't. I might get close, or if I did it every day, but then I wouldn't even be able to do it every day because I live in a system that wouldn't allow me to
Yeah.
train
Yeah.
every day. But that would be my only hope to do it. So like that's some of the nuances that we're talking about. And I think what I'm hearing you saying as well, and this is like genuinely what I'm realizing more and more and more in my own work, is like, how do I use the qualities that I possess to bring in the qualities that someone else over here possesses that aren't like mine?
Yes.
And how do we then raise ground level
Yeah.
localized community
Yes.
together?
Yes.
How do I use the change? How do I use that hero journey, or whatever you want to call it, that I've been on, to not just go, I've fucking done it, so you lot do it
Yeah.
as well? How do I do it so I go, what what I've gained as a result of that, how do we lift each other up? How do I use it for the lady that you talked
Yes.
about in that case study? What do I do? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have any
I,
examples of that.
I love that. And I think that's why, in terms of organizations, where when you're looking at outside the organization, that you can embed, it doesn't have to be an organization that has social responsibility as part of what they're offering. It doesn't have to be a charity, but you can't, like, what those, the money that you have as an organization, the staff power that you have, you can use that resources to bring others on the journey. It's not taken away from the individual. You can use what you have to genuinely work, like, meaningfully in communities. I think sometimes it's so tokenistic, but there is things you can do to genuinely bring other people on the journey. That example that I shared of, like, using their apprenticeship levy to help people coming out of prison to do an apprenticeship, like that is using your, essentially, let's call it privilege, because that's just what it comes up from, using your skills to lift others, but do it in a really meaningful way that's like and I love that what you said about community, and I think there's so much of that we lost, that like change happens in community in my mind. And so if you have someone like, you know, that you were saying about, like, you know, you've turned your life around, you've had this success, if then you, that's fine, share that story, that's amazing, it gives us hope. But look what else I'm doing, I'm genuinely working in community and making resources and things available from the grassroots. Like it's I think that there's definite nuance around like making sure that's meaningful as well, but you know, creating genuine partnerships in community, because ultimately the communities we serve, they know what their issues are, right? They know what their problems are. Let communities lead, be part of the change. Like a lot of the work that I did in the charity, when I worked in system change in a charity, was understanding the problems from the user, from what you, because it's service design, you'll call it you, but from the people who are experiencing the problems, and let them genuinely design solutions. And we can use that, you know, you could do that, you can bring people on that journey, but let it be community led, and not what I think the solution is, but
And that's
communities as find the solution.
and that's a big thing. And I've talked about this probably on previous episodes of the podcast, but community, what we think community means has changed, right? And if we just take the example of the coach that you talked about, and we're not going to pick on that specific coach, right? But let's just take a generic coach from today's world, right? Who has put together this way of healing yourself and becoming rich in 5 days or whatever, right? What they are now calling a community is a group of people that have come together and have similar attributes to them.
Yeah.
So when they implement what they're doing, they become part of this quote unquote community. And if you don't have the attributes needed for what they've done to implement to work for you, then you'll be ostracized and you're not part of the community. And that's not really community.
No.
Community is when a body of people come together for a shared reason. And once upon a time before the internet, that was living together in you know, in a certain, and it's like, how do we come together as a community to live well together in, you know, alongside our differences? If you're good at making things and I'm a thinker, or like I can't sit still very long, so I'm going to be the person who does this over here. And that's like, you know, what now unfortunately is quote unquote old school community, which is how do we come together like in those circumstances. And that's when you get, for me, when you get into the realms of like capitalism, right? In a community, capitalism, I do believe can work, right? Which is when people do well, when they serve their community and they work really hard and, you know, all of that kind of stuff, and then they serve their community in that way, they might do better than other people in terms of finances. But what we've got in today's world is this hyper capitalism, which is where that coach again that we just made up, right, is not interested in serving the wider community. They're just interested in taking as much money as they can from everybody to serve them and the people that are just like them. That's like, call it hyper capitalism. I don't know what you would call it, but that's when it's problematic.
100%. And I think that exists a lot in the
it's everywhere.
Like it's everywhere. And like you said, like when I talk about community, I mean genuine community with people living in communities where there are social problems, where there are issues they want to change, that you bring together diverse voices around a shared issue, and whoever's facilitating that community understands themselves enough that they can tolerate the discomfort, and they're not leading with their agenda. They can sit with the discomfort of the difficult conversations and the diverse perspectives and create genuine inclusion. And again, I think everything comes down to that understanding ourselves. So if you want to use your platform to then bring community together, coming back to yourself and understanding yourself, and so you're not then becoming the savior complex by creating this community. It's like, it really is that deep work to intuitively like understand who you are at the core, not who you've been taught to be, and then not then perpetuating those inequalities and stuff through your new community. It's genuine community where you can create this sense of belonging, where everyone's heard, everyone shares their views, and you create solutions together. It's not one person driving the agenda as the coach that we talked about. It's that person driving their agenda with a privileged few, can pay them loads of money and create this echo chamber. And that's literally the opposite of community to me. Like, community is where you can genuinely, and that's really what I try to do with my work in organizations, is how do you create that sense of community, but within an organization where diverse voices can be heard, where you can create a ripple effect, you can work in communities that you genuinely look after your people. And I feel everything comes down to doing that, for me, that deeper work to really understand yourself, to take that systemic view that you're not just perpetuating those systems anymore, that you understand yourself on that deeper level, that you're not going to then prop up those systems. And I on my website, I have this thing where it says the change we want to see in the world starts with understanding ourselves. And I think that to me, that's the crux of it. But then getting people who want to do that's quite hard.
It's that, yeah, and it's that. I feel like the step is the dropping from your head down into your body, right? And because that's when, like, I think you make the true breakthroughs. Because then, like, when you're like, I don't want to. Actually, I don't care if I sound a bit too woo-woo, but I think when you're at one with yourself, you can't be in the company of somebody else and not be empathetic towards what they're feeling.
Yeah.
Right. And then as a result of that, when I'm in tune with myself and I'm not just up in my head, because when I'm up in my head, I'm up in the system.
Yeah. Right? You are. That's because it's in your consciousness. You're in the system. Yeah.
Yeah. So because I'm in this, when I drop down into my body, that's almost like when you go beyond the system.
Yeah.
And then you see the system, and then you're like, oh shit, like there's like serious work to do here. Because then as well, and I think you just spoke to this a little bit, you get a lot of the like discomfort then.
Yeah.
Because when you search your heart, like, let me give you an example, right? My friend Hass, who I used to do a podcast with, but he's still my best friend, right? We used to do a podcast called 115 Miles, and it was called that because we grew up 115 miles apart. He grew up in like Tottenham, I grew up in Swindon. I'm white, he's brown, right? So we like saw the world in different, and I just remember being on a podcast with him, and I was talking about an England game or something, and I was like, oh, we ought to go to an England game, right? Because we both like football. And he went, oh, I've never been to an England game. And I was like, why not? What's the matter with you? Call yourself a football fan, right? It was all in that way, because we'd speak bantery on there. And he's like, nah, it's like, they're not the best places for people like me. And I was like, what? And it wouldn't have even, and our whole podcast was about talking about race and all that kind of stuff. But it's still, and then boom, because I'm in my body when I'm with him, I'm like, fuck, man.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, then the next thought you have, right, that wants to make you run back up in your head is, not only am I hurting for him, I realize I'm part of the problem in some way.
Yeah.
But the reaction in that moment is to go back up in my head and go, yeah, it's part of the system, and you just come with me, you'll be all right, put it back on him. And that's the head, yeah? When you stay in the heart, you're like, oh my God, man, I've got to do something about this, and it involves me. Yeah. Does that make sense?
100%. It's being able to sit in that discomfort and connect. You drop out of your thinking mind into your body. That's where your intuitive wisdom lives. And the more you can do that, like, you won't perpetuate the system. And so I did a diploma with the Intuitive Psychology Association, and one of the techniques that we use is called unlayering, and where you literally sit with someone and you connect them to their intuition, and you drop below and you get them to talk, and they drop below their conditioning, and they drop out of their head into their body. You drop in below all this negative conditioning, and they always get to the core of who they really are intuitively, which is always worth, love, peace, calm, all this right kind of intuitive knowing that lives there, but you're just so disconnected from it, from all the layers of conditioning that live above it. And when we connect to that space, you're like, whoa, that's where the magic happens, because you don't perpetuate the system anymore, because you're at the core. I know it sounds a bit woo, but it's just true. Like that, you're at the core of who you actually are before the world taught you who to be, right? Well, the more we can connect to that intuitive wisdom, the better. And I think the systems that we navigate all the time, deliberately disconnect us from that intuitive wisdom. But if we can drop below that conditioning into our bodies and connect to who we really are at the core of our being, that to me, that's where the real change and the real social change happens, because you can tolerate that discomfort.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny, and I was listening to you then, and we both made that reference to it's like it might sound a bit woo or whatever, but that's again the system creeping in,
Yeah.
because the system tells you, if you're coming out of your rational mind and you're coming into your body, right? Like the system doesn't want you to do that. It wants you to be up in your head. It wants you to be up in your head and believe that there is a way out of it. You can rationalize your way out of it, like that kind of materialistic. If you can't measure it and see it and touch it and feel it, it doesn't exist. And so the system again, like, makes us woo woo and crazy for what? For saying be human. For saying come home to be human. What we're woo woo and out there.
Yeah,
like it's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's so crazy that the predominant social narrative is that that's woo woo. Get in your head, be productive. And what we're saying is like just remember who you are. Like genuinely remember, be human, connect to who you really are in your body. We all have a body, right? Like why do we need to be so disconnected from it? Why do we need to be so head led? But again, that's the predominant, narrative, isn't it? That we absorb, and then we have to challenge ourselves to go, no, because when you've experienced that work yourself, you know that that's the truth. But taking people on that journey because of the dominant social narrative is quite hard.
Yeah. Helen, this has been incredible. It's been incredible. I mean, look, if we talk about intuition, I can't even remember if I was talking to you before we hit record or whether I've said this on record, but like I intuitively read a few paragraphs that were on the form that you put, and I was like, this is the person I want. This is exactly the conversation I want to be having on the podcast. And it's crazy to me that it's still a niche conversation. I hope that what we can do is start to change that and make this not niche, and people open up people's minds and bodies, open up their minds to know that their bodies is where it's at.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's it. It feels like it's like the part of them. And I do think people are craving this conversation, and you can feel it. Like you can feel, and so I hope that, that's partly why I want to share my work, is that it becomes part of almost like a movement of change. It's beyond the individual to become like this catalyst for change. So yeah, I've loved this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go, I will put it all in the show notes and stuff like that. But I mean, you are now thinking about it. When I went and did a bit of research on you, a bit of a massive kept secret, and that's probably because of what you think about social media.
I know.
Right? But
I definitely need to get more out there. I am on Instagram, but I don't check it very. I go on there, dabble, but I'm mainly on LinkedIn. I don't post all the time, but I do need to, and it's definitely being on this podcast has been hopefully helped to get that story and that work out there more.
Yeah, I'll put the links to all of that and your website so that they can get to your LinkedIn and stuff like that. I would love to see more of you out there, because this is just as we've been chatting the whole time, I'm thinking, how can I do this? How can I implement this? Like, where can I bring this in? Just incredible. And I honestly, the conversation when we came on, I'm rambling a little bit, but when we came on and before we hit record, because I didn't know you, I literally had a few paragraphs. I was like, I hope we have the conversation that I want to have, and it's gone. And I'm not just saying this; it's gone way beyond what I could have thought. So I'm super happy, and I can't wait to share this with everybody.
No, I'm so pleased. I'm really grateful to be here and be able to share this work, and I just want to get better at shouting about it and bring people on that journey of taking the systemic lens. And when I work with organizations, I do workshops and stuff. I need to spread that more and create those practical skills that people can take on and start to implement some of this.
Definitely. And just lastly, you work with individuals as well.
Yeah.
So if there's people listening to this and they're like, I want to come and work with Helen, there is a way for them to work with you.
So I work with individuals, so predominantly women, but I do individual coaching who want to connect to their intuition and really challenge those societal norms and do things differently and drop into your body and do things that are aligned in the way to who you really are at your core. And then I do the human-centered stuff with organizations who want to develop human-centered, same principle in a way, like human-centered leaders who are very emotionally intelligent, understand their workforce, and then that translates into how they operate as an organization, both internally and within communities.
Amazing. Helen, thank you so much for this conversation. I can't wait to share it with everybody. And I hope this isn't the last time we connect.
Yeah,
it won't
definitely.
Be. I won't allow it to be.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional. So thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.